Hello, you're watching Stretford Paddock. We're here for the paper talk this morning, as we are every morning, of course, at this point. We've got a few bits of news today. We're going to be looking at Jadon Sancho's move to United. We looked a little bit at it yesterday, but the news was coming out sort of last night-ish, and we didn't really get to it properly. We're also going to be looking at this news coming out again this morning that Toni Kroos was a whisker away from joining Man United under David Moyes. We'll look at the details of that story. And we're also going to be looking at Di Maria hates United. So let's hear what you have to say about Di Maria as that we go along. I think that'll be a nice way to end things. A nice light-hearted way where no one's mad at anyone talking about Di Maria at the end there. But let's start, like we said, with this Jadon Sancho story that keeps coming up. It does seem as though... It does seem as though United's interest in Jadon Sancho is definitely real. We heard during the summer last year that we were interested in Sancho, but the deal couldn't be done because a mixture of Dortmund basically refusing to sell. I think they wanted one more year out of Sancho, and United not really being able to kind of get their targets generally. I think they prioritised a centre-back and a full-back, and both of those deals came through. So I think the Sancho deal was kind of one of those where it was like, we're not selling him now, come back next year. But this is coming from Duncan Castles, the update on this story. He has basically said in the last few days that he's suggesting that developments at Chelsea and Liverpool, who are the two key opponents or rivals in the race for Sancho's signature. I like that it's a race, like there's a finish line. He's stood waiting there with a pen, and whoever gets that contract there first will sign him. But in the race for Sancho's signature, the main players seem to be United, Liverpool and Chelsea. They're the teams that are consistently reported to be in for Sancho. There have been also talks about Madrid and Barca, but I think that's basically just any time a young, good player becomes relatively available, people link them with Real Madrid and Barcelona. I'm not sure what actual credibility those rumours have. But again, talking about Liverpool and Chelsea, Duncan Castles, of course, reputable journalist. His reputation seems to sort of drift in and out a bit. Under Mourinho, he's very, very reliable indeed. He seemed to be a bit of almost a mouthpiece for Mourinho, and that's kind of waned slightly. But it does seem to have come back into that kind of more reliable picture in recent times under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. He's discussed Sancho's future and suggests developments at Chelsea and Liverpool now means a move to Old Trafford may actually be the teenager's only option this summer. He said there's an indication that Dortmund are ready to sell in the summer. They've got the development they think they can get from him, which essentially means he is at the peak of the price that they're ever going to get. If you wait another year, you're basically, increasing the chance that he'll have an off-season. He'll only got 6 goals, 10 assists or something like that. He's 19 years old. Just about to turn 20, and he's already got, I think, 15 goals and 13 assists this season, which equals his assist tally for last season, which was already remarkable for a teenager. And I think, like you said, it's a good way of phrasing it. They've got the development they think they can get from him. They know they're going to sell him at some point, and he is probably at that 110, 120 million kind of peak level transfer fee at the moment. He said they've raised his value to the point where they think they can get over 100 million euros. The agents are trying to get the best environment for Sancho. Don't really know what that means. Environment's a strange word. It's a very European word to use because it kind of, does that mean the best environment for him as in the new club would be the best environment, or they think that Dortmund, the current situation at Dortmund is the best environment? I'm not quite sure exactly what that means. But then he goes on to say, with Ziyech signing for Chelsea, it makes it difficult for Chelsea to sign Sancho. They play in a similar position, both kind of, right-sided attacking midfielders who can play kind of across the line. But that adds to a list of Willian, Pulisic, Pedro for Chelsea. They've also got Loftus-Cheek, who plays as a sort of slightly more attacking midfielder. He's not quite a number 10, but he plays in that role. They've also got Hudson-Odoi coming through. And I think another huge signing in a position that they've literally just reinforced looks slightly less likely than it did before the Ziyech signing. He also goes on to say, Duncan Castles goes on to say, Lampard was opposed to bringing in Sancho in the January window and didn't want that scale of transfer to be associated him with his first big deal at Chelsea. It sounds as though that Lampard has basically gone, if I spend 120 million on someone and it doesn't work, that could be the end of me. Basically, you kind of hanging all your fruit on one hook or something, whatever they say. You're hanging all your eggs in one, hat. And I don't think that Lampard wanted to put so much pressure on himself and on Sancho by making such a marquee signing. That is what Castles is suggesting there. Moving on to Liverpool then, Castles goes on to say, Liverpool like Jadon Sancho a lot, but they're briefing that they don't want to overpay for him and don't want to overpay his wages for his type and age, which could cause dressing room problems. Basically, that means that for a 20-year-old, which it would be when he moves in January, a 20-year-old coming in on the right wing or the left wing, essentially competing with Sadio Mane and Mo Salah for places, for wages, for hierarchy. I think bringing a 20-year-old in on the sort of money he would be looking for, sort of that 250, maybe £300,000 a week kind of money, real elite level stuff, that is paying him more than their top earners. It also puts pressure on. Imagine if you give him a 5-year contract, the expectation is in 2 or 3 years, probably 3 years, to extend that contract. So then you have to give him another pay rise. So in 3 years, he's going from 250 to 300,000. And you've got a player who's 22 years old on 300 grand a week, and that completely skews the pay scale of the club going forward. Liverpool don't quite pay the same sort of wages that United do. So I can see his point there. And again, he mentions there Liverpool are briefing that they don't want to overpay for him and don't want to overpay his wages, which means that this is the opinion that Liverpool have put out themselves. So this is what Liverpool want us to think. So that's what they want Sancho to think, that's what they want their fans to think, that's what they want journalists to think. It's not necessarily the truth, but it is the truth of what they are saying at the moment. So they might be just saying that so that they can pay less for him. They might be saying that so that when they don't get him, they've kind of covered their backs by saying, you know what, we didn't want to ruin the wage structure at the club. We've got good players already. We didn't want to have to overpay. Because also, let's finish the quote then, I suppose. Duncan Castles finishes his quote by saying, so that probably limits Sancho's realistic option to Manchester United. So there's the big quote for you. There's the sort of cherry on top is ruling out everyone else, and United seem to be the only club that are willing to pay his wages, pay his transfer fee. And I think there was a suggestion the other day as well after the Watford game from Solskjaer. He was talking about Bruno Fernandes, but he said Bruno Fernandes is a key piece of the puzzle, and it's a puzzle toward the business end, a piece toward the business end of the pitch. We enforced with Maguire and Wan-Bissaka in the summer these defensive options that would help solidify the defence, and we've, as the season's gone on, slowly seen that 7 clean sheets in the last 9 games for United. He then talked about how, Fernandes and other signings are toward that sort of front end of the pitch where you spend your big money, where that really takes you the difference from being 4th or 5th to being, 3rd or 2nd. I think United are keen to sign both a striker and a winger. That seems to have been something that has been briefed by United over the last few months. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think that this kind of deductive sort of journalism by Castles there is just that? Do you think he's literally just putting 2 and 2 together, that Chelsea have signed Ziyech, Liverpool don't want to ruin the wage structure, so it must be United? Or do you think there is a bit more of an inside kind of knowledge as to why United are the last people on the table for Sancho? Would you like Sancho? Do you think, right? Obviously, Liverpool have been, they've done all right this season. I don't know the stats, but they've done okay. Do you think that them turning their nose up at Sancho will add extra pressure to any potential move for him at United? Basically, everyone's going to go, let's say he joins United, and after 10 games he's got 1 goal, no assists, or 1 assist, no goals. Everyone's going to go, this is why Liverpool didn't want to overpay for him. They're kind of planting this seed that this transfer isn't good value for money by briefing what they are briefing about his wages and things like that. Sindor saying, whatever the price United has to pay to get Sancho, right wing is a position that needs to be addressed in the summer. I am of the same mind, Sindor, to be honest with you, because I just think it's a clear position we're lacking. He is the standout player, both in terms of what would be the word for it? Kind of his age, his quality, his availability, he fits the mould of the player that we're trying to sign at the moment, which is young players for the future. Supposedly with an emphasis on British players, which I think is kind of if they are British, good. If not, then I don't think we'd only sign in British players, as we saw with Fernandes. Someone's saying 60, 70 million with 30 million add-ons. I don't think... Well, maybe we could see that. That does seem... I think Dortmund would want a lot more than that. They got 110 million euros for Dembele a couple of years ago from Barcelona, who didn't put anything like the numbers that Jadon Sancho's put up. And obviously France is a desirable and expensive country to buy players from. I know that he's not from France, but he is a French player. But I think British and English players, English specifically, do tend to add even another sort of 5 or 10% premium on top of even a French player. Can you name a better right winger? No, not in the world at the moment. He's arguably the standout. I mean, Fernandes, I suppose, numbers-wise, was up with similar kind of thing, 15 goals, 15 assists type range. But he's the standout teenager in world football, and has been for 2 years. And one of my only concerns with Sancho is you see him play for Dortmund, and they are this free-flowing attacking side where they get in behind the opposition's defence a lot. They rely on quick, early passing and really, a lot of speed in their attack. You see the amount of times Haaland someone just plays the ball across and he's at the back post waiting, unmarked, just tapping the ball in. Because the way they play is so explosive and quick. I don't quite think you can play that way in the Premier League. I think there's too much of an emphasis on deep line defences, whereas in Bundesliga, from what I've seen, there doesn't seem to be that same level of sort of 90 minutes of we're going to defend in a block, you can't get behind us, you're going to have to be either really slight with your passes through or take long shots, that kind of thing. It would be interesting to see how Sancho can adapt to a league that, like I said, has more of an emphasis on defending, seemingly, than Bundesliga. Every time I watch a Bundesliga game, at least one of the goals is just 3 people running straight onto the goal with no defenders in the way. And you very rarely see that in England. Although it depends, obviously, how the team's set up, how quickly you're set up to counter-attack, that sort of thing. But yeah, Jadon Sancho is clearly the outstanding teenager in world football at the moment. And the fact that he's done it 2 seasons in a row, this double digits goals and assists, I think, like I said, he'd matched his assist tally for last season already this season. So he's clearly improving. I think, we should spend whatever we can on him. Dortmund would want around 120 million. Yeah, like I said, they got 110 million euros, I think, for Dembele a couple of summers ago, and he didn't have the CV anything like resembling what Sancho's has been so far. Why would he leave Dortmund and come here when we don't play in the Champions League? Money? Yes. Again, there's so many things that go into a transfer these days. It's not just where am I going to win the most trophies, because let's face it, right? I know Dortmund could win the Champions League this season, but they have been in the Champions League every year for 10 years at least, or pretty much every year for 10 years since Klopp was there really. In his reign, and they've got to one final, and in that final they got battered. Like, they aren't that likely to win the Champions League. I know that it's obviously a great competition to play, and you get to play against the top teams in the world, top teams in Europe, but he is more likely to win it at Dortmund than he is at United, because we're not in it, but he's still quite unlikely to win the Champions League at Dortmund. Genk are in the Champions League quite regularly. Young boys get in the Champions League. He's not more likely to join them than United just because they're in the Champions League. I think you have to have some expectation of how likely a club is to win the Champions League over the next 5 years. And if he sees himself as part of a rebuild at United, which so far, personnel-wise, in Fernandes, Maguire, Wan-Bissaka, and obviously Dan James is just a £15 million signing that's clearly exceeded his expectations. The personnel we've brought in for the first time in a long time has been consistently good and has consistently improved the team. So if he sees himself as part of a rebuild that, in 5 years' time, we're going to be challenging for the Champions League consistently, I mean, obviously that would be very optimistic, but, that might play a part. Secondly, the money factor is obviously going to be a huge one. He's probably on about maybe £100,000 a week at Dortmund. That's just a guess, but I'm assuming he's signed a big contract there. But we could easily double that. We could maybe £250,000, £300,000 a week, depending on how highly we prioritise him. We've seen players willing to move to China in the peak of their career. We've seen Oscar move to China. We've seen, the sort of that influx of players that moved off to Russia when there was loads of money out there. Top players, the likes of Carrasco. We've seen Axel Witsel. We've seen Hulk. We've seen loads of good players move to China and Russia just for money. And United can offer the similar sort of money you would get from a place like Russia or China, but with a much higher chance of winning trophies, with a much more eyes on you as a player. And again, that's something that can't be understated either. When one of the things that attracts people to a team these days is, what can it get me on social media? How famous can it make me? How can it increase my chances of becoming a world star? Because it's not just the money you get from Man United each week. If you are one of the most recognisable stars in the world, you're going to get more money for your boot sponsor. You're getting training sponsors. You're getting your fitness stuff taken care of. You're getting all these kind of things. Your money and your kind of presence in world football can be improved at United much more than it can at Dortmund, for instance. Like I said, social media numbers, Instagram followers, your sort of recognisability as a player, the fact that you might become one of the sort of top clients for like Adidas or Nike or that kind of thing. Those sorts of things can't be underestimated either, especially these days. Obviously, Paul Pogba is someone that's come to United, and his star, whilst he was already one of the most recognisable faces in Europe, he's gone to being probably the most famous midfielder in the world now. And that's in a time where he's not really won much at United, and he's been this controversial figure the whole time. You can't underestimate just how famous playing for Man United makes you compared to everyone else. And again, it's only a small thing, but it's another thing to add on to the list of reasons why someone might join United. Let's move on to our second story then. We'll have a quick whip round back to the Sancho story again in a bit. This is a bit of a fun one. Next story. Di Maria hates United. I know that United fans haven't been a big fan of Di Maria since he left United, really. The whole snake thing, of course, coming out. This one coming from, what's his name? Marcin Bulka, who is apparently a PSG goalkeeper. Never heard of him myself, but anyway. He said that Di Maria hates Man United. He doesn't have one good... He doesn't have one good memory from the club. Whenever they're on TV, he tells us to change the channel. Watching that replay of Ashley Young pushing him into the fence at Old Trafford gets sweeter and sweeter every day, doesn't it? And I was never even one to have that much of a go at Di Maria. I think he got like 13 assists and 7 goals when he was at United. I didn't think he was that bad. I think his how poor he was at United has been overstated since he left. But clearly now that he hates United, I think, let's watch that Ashley Young chucking him into the fence again. Someone in the comments having a go at Di Maria there. Yeah, what do you think to Di Maria? Try and keep it as PG as possible so I can actually read some of these comments out. Someone said, Di Maria, who gives an F? Yeah, that's a good point. I just thought it was a bit of a fun story, wasn't it? Di Maria didn't push himself to be a United player. Yeah, maybe. He also got burgled, didn't he, when he first came here? Which I know you should be able to get. You can obviously replace those things, but if I got burgled, I'd be a bit scared and all. But yeah, I think he's gone on to be a good player, and after United, I think he's got the 3rd or 4th most assists in the 2010s as a decade. So he's been, I think, an underrated player, actually, Di Maria. The Snake doesn't seem like a very nice chap. Well, it wasn't him coming out and saying it, to be fair. It was his goalie. I bet you'd be right annoyed if you were just like, oh yeah, I hate United, change the channel. And then someone came out and said it. I bet he's furious at him. Di Maria's face when we came back to win in Paris was precious. It was great, wasn't it? That whole night was sensational. Di Maria's best moment is leaving. I think that chip against Leicester was pretty good as well. But yeah, then second best moment was leaving. Di Maria's a snake. Didn't he win Player of the Month his first month? I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised because he started really well, like I said. Right then, our final story. This one is another one. This one actually leaves me feeling a bit sorry for David Moyes. Yeah, you heard. This is Toni Kroos coming out with an interview with The Athletic, talking about his time at Bayern and obviously at Madrid and how he doesn't get nerves. But he's also talking about his potential deal to Man United that was agreed under David Moyes. But then it was scuppered by the incoming Louis van Gaal. This is Toni Kroos quoted saying, David Moyes had come to see me. So, right, actually, let's go back a little bit. Let's wind it back a bit. Steven Gerrard and Luis Suarez texted Kroos trying to get him to come to Liverpool in 2014. He said that it wasn't a straight-up chat, but they offered to tell me more about the club and so on. Funny thing was, Suarez was about to leave to Barcelona anyway. So I guess that was Gerrard, like, making elbowing Suarez, making him text him. It says, in any case, he'd already decided to join Manchester United at that stage. David Moyes had come to me and the contract had basically been done. But then Moyes was fired and Louis van Gaal came in, which complicated matters. Yeah, that does tend to complicate things. Louis wanted time to build his own project. I didn't hear anything from United for a while and started having doubts. Then the World Cup started and Ancelotti called and that was it. So that's how close United were to signing arguably the best midfielder of the last 10 years. David Moyes almost signed many players. Well, he maybe did, but this is the player himself saying that the contract was basically signed. And personally, I do feel a little bit sorry for Moyes in that he clearly was promised certain things. He clearly, the players that it sounded like he nearly signed in the likes of Fabregas, the likes of, I think another one was, what's his name? Thiago at Bayern Munich. And obviously Toni Kroos, who, like I said, this deal basically was done. That could that have been enough, do you think, to turn around his time at United? And I feel sorry for David Moyes. He wanted to sign players, but the board balls it up. Well, I don't think, again, this, according to Kroos here, this isn't the board messing it up. This is LVG messing it up or, wanting a different player. I think you can't blame the board for the new manager coming in and saying that he doesn't want Toni Kroos, who I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I think Toni Kroos would have been in the youth team or just coming through at Bayern Munich when Van Gaal was there. Was Toni Kroos there at the same time as Van Gaal, 2010? I believe, no. Was Toni Kroos at Bayern Munich when Van Gaal was there in 2010? Coming through as a youngster. Anyway, I'm not sure. But yeah, I think you can't blame the board. You can't blame Moyes. Yeah, believe it. Decisions happened in 2014 that weren't either the board or Moyes' fault. I suppose you have to blame, if there is blame to be had, Louis van Gaal. Charlene Kerrigan saying, not a fan of Tony anyway. The most decorated midfielder of, the last decade. 3 or 4 Champions Leagues, a La Liga, 2 or 3 Bundesligas, and a World Cup. I think you have to be a fan of that, don't you? David Moyes and Ole as United managers, you couldn't write it. Well, I think you could write it. At the time, Moyes was the obvious option. That's the funniest thing. If you remember back to when Everton had overachieved for sort of 5 or 10 years under Moyes, he was Scottish as well, which I know is silly, but it kind of had this kind of new Fergie vibe to it a little bit. Moyes didn't seem like a strange option at the time. I don't think he was everyone's first choice, but he certainly wasn't like signing David Moyes today. Feel sorry for Moyes, but he was just not good enough. Inherit a team of champions, but got us not even challenging for 4th place. Yeah, there is always that as well. Yeah, I'm not defending that. Yeah, not for me, lol. Just Toni Kroos is crap. You know what, Charlene? I respect your sort of solidity with your own opinion there, but it just seems like a strange position to defend. But again, respect. I'd still take Toni Kroos now. With Bruno, he would be on fire. I think the legs may just be on the sort of dodgy side, and he's one of those players who has had 3 or 4 big contracts in his career. You're probably paying him 300 grand for a 31-year-old that's, I think he's 31, something like that, doesn't quite have the legs. Apparently we are scouting Odegaard. Yeah, if he was that good, he'd be playing at Real Madrid though, wouldn't he? Let's be honest. Woodward's at the wheel. Tell me, how crap does it feel? Yeah. But again, you can't blame Woodward for this one. As much as we want to blame him for everything, LVG's fault. Woodward telling Klopp United or Disneyland during that period, you can blame him for that. Yeah, I will blame him for that. Right, let's go back to our main story for the day then before we wrap things up. This is the Jadon Sancho story coming out of Duncan Castles. He is saying that it looks as though United are currently the only option for Jadon Sancho. Chelsea have just bought Ziyech and will be reluctant to spend that kind of money on Sancho. He also said, which I think is quite a big story in itself, that Lampard didn't want to sign Sancho in January because he didn't want to make such a marquee signing so early on in his career at Chelsea, which I don't know what that says really, but it kind of has a feel of like he was a bit scared to put his neck on the line so early on. I don't know if that's a regular thing, a common occurrence, or if it's a bit of a lacking bravery, or I don't know. It just has a strange feel to me that he was like, oh no, I know we can maybe sign this great world-class young 19-year-old, but I'm scared about how much pressure it puts on me. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into that. But also that Liverpool seemingly are briefing that they can't afford or are unwilling to afford Sancho based on his Dortmund's transfer fee demands and Sancho's wage demands and how that would affect the balance of the wages in the current Liverpool squad. And like I said, Duncan Castles then finishes his quotes by saying that it looks at the moment United are the only option for Sancho. Let me know in the comments whether you think Sancho would be a good signing for United. Thank you very much for joining us. We're going to be back for a podcast in a little bit. We should have Jay on from Full Time Devils, so be sure to check that out. Again, thanks for joining me. We'll be back tomorrow for more news. We'll see you in a bit.